Welcome to the Ascends at Boston Avenue podcast. My name is Philip Boone, and I use he, him, his pronouns.
And I'm Caitlin Drake. I use female pronouns, she, her, hers.
Before we begin, I'd like to state that the views represented in this podcast are those of the individuals in this conversation and not the official position of Boston Avenue United Methodist Church. As COVID-19 cases wane in our community over the last few months, Boston Avenue has moved to different phases of reopening our facilities and restarting our programs. Like countless other nonprofits and businesses, we are navigating what we will return to, what we will keep from this past year, and what things we will change. To talk about reopening and some of the exciting things we are exploring as a church community, we are joined today by our guests, Senior Pastor at Boston Avenue, Reverend David Wiggs, and our Director of Welcoming, Belynda Clanton. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hey, Philip.
So just to start, our Sunday experience now has an in-person component we have for the last month or so. What does an in-person Sunday morning look like at Boston Avenue?
Well, I can start. This is David Wiggs, he, him, his pronouns, senior pastor here at Boston Avenue. We've now moved back to what we would call a full schedule with multiple worship services on a Sunday morning in the building, as well as Sunday school groups for all ages. So it looks similar to what we did before in terms of cars in the parking lot, people greeting at the doors, people going in lots of different directions inside the building. I would say the biggest difference right now is we are aware of safety protocols. One, because we've been working on those a lot, and we have things like hand washing stations around the building where you can grab a little hand sanitizer as you move throughout the space. But the other thing is that people are still reticent to come back into a space with lots of people. So we have fewer people attending than we did previous to the COVID outbreak.
What factors went into the decision to reopen for worship, for Sunday school, for all of the activities, events that we have at the church? What factors went into it?
Right. So from the beginning of COVID, so back in March of 2020, I began to see reports about it wasn't even called COVID yet. This disease, this virus that was making people sick. So we said from the beginning that we were going to follow the science. We were going to listen to the medical and science experts, epidemiologists specialize in this kind of thing. So we were going to follow that. So we've done our best to stay up on what became an ever-changing situation in terms of cases, as well as recommendations from the CDC, our local county health department, that kind of thing, of how we navigate this. So we've tried to be part of the solution to stopping COVID rather than part of the problem of spreading it. Other churches made very different choices about that. My feeling was our church tries to be a good community partner in lots of ways. So if the mayor was asking for everybody to mask, if the CDC was saying everybody should be masking, we were going to be masking. If they were saying you shouldn't have large groups of people together, then we were not going to have large groups of people together. We also set up a medical professionals advisory panel of people in the medical field out of our own congregation to help me and those of us making decisions stay up on the latest scientific and medical findings, as well as the latest recommendations and how we might interpret those. So we have followed that throughout the pandemic. So coming out of it, what we were looking for were decreasing number of new cases of COVID, decreasing hospitalizations, just decreasing numbers of people dying. And of course, the main thing that we saw as the real game changer was the vaccine. So I wanted to get vaccinated as soon as possible. I wanted our congregants to do the same because it was very clear after they did the trials which, there's a misnomer that somehow we didn't really test the vaccines. That's just not true. They did extensive trials on all of these. The bureaucracy moved more quickly in approving and reviewing those trials, but we've done all the best practices in terms of how a vaccine is deemed safe for the general public. So once all those tests were done and the vaccines began to come on the market, it was really clear that to have the vaccine meant that even if you got COVID, which was a very small percentage chance, you would not die, and you probably wouldn't even go to the hospital. So that was a real game changer. So once vaccines had been around for a while, and the information I was gathering from our congregation is that we had a very high percentage of people being vaccinated. We decided back in March that finally we could open in a limited capacity. So we began to open, one service at a time, and then added a second service, then added Sunday school. We continued to do outside experiences for those who didn't want to come inside. So it's been a very kind of phased, step at a time process.
So as a staff person who is involved in this kind of every day, I know that we have some new and exciting things within our building that we didn't have before the pandemic. So what were some of the investments and changes that were made that folks who are coming into our building could look for?
I'm Belynda Clanton, and I use pronouns she, her, hers. Some of the new things that we brought to the church is an effort to make everyone feel truly warmly welcome. All of us during the pandemic had so many barriers placed before us that we now have the opportunity to extend God's love generously, and we had time to think about it and make it an exciting time for people. Really focused on that extra care of welcoming. So we have purchased extra banners that say welcome, that fly outside of the church, and as people are pulling in the parking lots, we know that's important. Statistics tell us that people make a decision within the first 7 minutes of whether they're going to return to a church. So we have to remember that's before the preacher has spoken, before they've heard any music. It's very important that they see all of us caring and loving and smiling as we come into this special place. So we have new banners in the parking lot, new welcome signs at every entrance. We have plenty of people greeting and smiling. We have congregation members who have longed for the day after the pandemic when they could go up to someone and just have a conversation again. So all these things make a huge difference and make people feel like, yes, this is the place I want to stay now and hear what the sermon is.
David, in terms of maybe changes to the interior of our facility, can you talk about some of those projects that have been stewarded?
Surely. As Belynda was saying, when we're looking at how do we provide the best welcome to people coming from a variety of backgrounds, we have decided not only extending the welcome outside the building, like she was saying, with welcome banners and flags to identify where the entrances are, people at the doors. We're also moving away from a paper-based kind of literature that tells people about the church to digital welcoming monitors, as we're calling them. So we'll be installing in the near future monitors that will be at all the major entrances and around the building as people come in. That will be giving them information about the space, but also programs and opportunities that are upcoming that they could participate in, and all those kind of things. So it's going to be a little different look for our church as people come in, but we really have worked hard to design it in such a way that it fits the historic architecture of our building and yet makes it modern in terms of the use of technology that's available. We're doing the same kind of thing with a Boston Avenue Church app that we've developed, where we used to pass paper sign-in sheets in the sanctuary. Now you can do that in the app. We used to do the same with offering plates for people to drop paper money into the plates, but most people now give electronically or in some digital form. So the app gives people the opportunity to do that, as well as like automatic drafts and some other kind of things you can set up electronically. The other thing we've done is during COVID, most of our small groups, well, all of our small groups were meeting via Zoom. If they were meeting, was not in person, the building was closed at that point. So they were meeting via Zoom. And we realized how important that experience is to connect with people far and wide. So Sunday school classes who have people who have retired or changed jobs and have had to leave the state can reconnect on a Sunday morning through Zoom technology. So as we come back into the building, we're installing technology in all of our classrooms that allow a hybrid experience. That is, people can be in the room in person, but they can also be in the room via Zoom and be connected that way. So we're just in the infancy of that. We've just begun that within the last 30 days, but the reports I'm getting from folks is really very helpful. We have people from multiple states that connect with Boston Avenue on Sunday morning before it was through the live stream and worship, but now it's enhanced because it's also part of that small group experience where they can connect with their Sunday school class or their Bible study group or whatever it might be. We also know that as people live longer, that means more people who are here might have hearing issues. And so we've also latched onto a new technology called the hearing loop, which enhances people's ability to adjust their hearing aids to just the right spot for them to hear best in the sanctuary, rather than just turning up the volume louder and louder. It's a different kind of frequency that the telecoil in their hearing aid can pick up in a way that works best for them. So that's an exciting new technology we're also using to try to be available in a positive way to as many people that come. Some people had told me, they stayed home because they could hear better on their television what I was saying or what the choir was singing than they could in person. So that's not a reason to stay away. We want to make sure the sound quality is fantastic for everyone who comes. So we think the hearing loop will help with that. Additionally, we have installed some new microphones in the choir loft because we realized that the music in the room was great, but the broadcast quality of the music was decreased because we didn't have appropriate audio equipment. So we have taken some steps to increase our ability to broadcast the music in a more stellar way. So that also people will be hearing if they're worshiping via the television or the live stream, they'll be hearing a different quality of sound from our broadcast.
I'd like to add to that we during Christmas, even during the pandemic, we used our parking lot differently than we had ever done before, and put lights on all the trees to be a sign of hope and welcome to the whole community. And we found that we got lots of positive responses on that. And it was another way to remind people of hope and welcome. And now we're very excited to announce that we have approval to put up a new large digital welcome sign about a block from the church as people are going down Cincinnati, another way of welcome and invitation to everyone who passes along that way.
I love it. There's so many exciting things that we've got going on. I hope people come and check them out in person when they get a chance. So I think about Sunday mornings, especially before I worked for a church, and the idea of waking up early and getting dressed in fancy church clothes and hauling my spouse all the way down to a church, and then, missing breakfast and all those pieces. It seemed like a pretty big barrier to get to church. And then this past year, I could just sit at home in my PJs with my cereal and watch church online. Or I could sleep in and just watch the video later. And so, that is a pretty hard routine to say, you should not do that. You should do this other thing instead. So how do you convince someone to give that up, to really come to the building in person on a Sunday, other than all of those cool things that we already mentioned, which I do think you should probably come check out if you get a chance?
Well, we try not to say should not, so it's okay. We try to be very patient with people and let God work in them in his own way at his own time. And, we have to remember that if we're trying to pick up a new habit, they say we have to do it 21 times. Well, people have had many, many more Sundays to practice the comfy in the jammy coffee approach at home. So it's going to take a while for people because we are creatures of habit and we've gotten used to doing things differently. The good news is that has been meaningful for them. They found that they could have that relationship online. And I think that's just evidence that God removes all barriers that prevent people from connecting with him. But at the same time, we need you here because I need your presence. Each one of us needs each other. It lifts our spirits. And I think that's the message we need to give to people is that you are needed here. You're not just welcome here, but we need you here. And when people know they're needed, they'll come back. They just need time to make that adjustment. We know that from so many aspects of work and community. This has just been sometimes a more difficult time than we like to acknowledge. We're a people that we say everything is fine. Everything is just fine. When really on the inside, we're struggling with those changes and there have been a lot thrown on people. So we'll just continue to be patient with them and no worries if you have missed a while. Just when you come, it's so good to see you.
And I think in addition to that, most of us come thinking about what am I going to get out of worship or what am I going to learn from Sunday school or who am I going to see that's, as Belynda was saying, will kind of lift my spirits. And certainly that's an important part of why we come together. But the other part of that is that God uses us in surprising ways. We never know that when we're in a group, how God might use us to actually serve and help and encourage and heal somebody else. And so when the Christian community gathers, that should be a part of what we also think about is, am I making myself available for God to use me to help somebody else? Because I may be coming, pretty self-focused in terms of whatever's going on in my life, or I may becoming with a burden and, but somebody might lift my burden. I might be able to lift somebody else's burden. But if we don't come, then we never know what that experience is going to be. There's also something about Christians gathering together or groups of people coming together, focusing on the same thing. In this case, focusing on God, worshiping God. There's something spiritual, but there's also a psychological or emotional dynamic that happens when we're all praying together or singing together or reading the same scripture. That doesn't happen the same way when we're all alone. Not that God can't work with us when we're alone as well as in a group, but there is a group dynamic that's been important from the beginnings of Christianity, where Jesus gathered a small group, where he reminded us that where 2 or 3 are gathered, my presence is there with you as well. And so when we come together, especially at a church like Boston Avenue, where there's hundreds or thousands of people who call this their church home, when those kind of numbers of people begin to gather, there is an excitement and I think a nourishment to our souls that happens in those worship experiences or in a larger group experience that don't happen otherwise. So it's exciting when we can come together. And of course, our sanctuary is designed with a beautiful organ. And we're rebuilding slowly numbers of people in our choir. We've taken that gradually for safety's sake, but now everyone in our adult choir is vaccinated. So we're adding more and more people together so they can do works of music that call for multiple voices that can be so inspiring that we don't have otherwise. So coming to the building for that kind of experience, the kind of beauty and majesty and glory that happens in a space designed for singing and worshiping is a powerful experience.
Both of you made a beautiful pitch for in-person Sunday experiences with that last question. But there are lots of reasons that folks might not come. Perhaps they're in the category of people who cannot receive the COVID vaccine and are protecting their physical health, or perhaps they're limited in their mobility, or maybe they live somewhere far away. What are we doing as a church to nurture those who may not be physically present with us and may not ever be able to be?
Yeah, let me start and then I'll toss it to Belynda. It's hard to recognize the impact and the reach of television and or a live stream that can go anywhere in the world, or a Zoom experience that can be connected, anywhere in the world. It really opens wide the door of possibilities for us reaching people and being in ministry with people. So we could give you examples all day of people that are reached. Sometimes, as I said earlier, it's people who have already been connected with this church family and have moved away. But often it's people that we never knew were in search of a spiritual community to support them, and they found us online, or they found us through a recommendation of someone else, and they tuned into the television broadcast. So we continually get cards and letters from people who tell us how important it is that even though they're not able to leave their home to worship, or their church is closed, so they're not worshiping, or some said during COVID, my church is not following best practices, so I'm not going back there because it's dangerous. And so then they find their spiritual nourishment through some kind of electronic connection with us. So that is, it's a different kind of connection than if you're giving somebody a hug and sitting next to them in worship. And yet it's, you can tell from the statements people make, it's so profound and deeply meaningful for folks to connect with us. And so, of course, not only do we broadcast content, but particularly Belynda, and then she involves the others of us, is noticing who those people are and responding to them to develop that relationship. So through emails, phone calls, personal cards, and letters, we've developed the relationship beyond just the Sunday morning experience. So I'll let her say more about sort of how that works from her perspective.
Yeah, if people register their attendance and they provide a phone number or an email, or maybe they're watching and make a comment through YouTube or some other means of receiving the broadcast, it's an indication to me that they want to be contacted. Because why else would I tell you that? Sometimes they will make a comment about the service. And so that is our invitation to follow up with them and say the same as we would if they were in person. If you spoke to me at the church, I would speak to you. If you give me your email or phone number, I'm going to call you and say, gosh, we're so glad you were here with us in spirit and that you took the time to register your attendance. And over, people say, oh, I can't believe you called me from that big church, or I can't believe that you read what I said, or, and it's like, yes, you're important to us. Everybody is important to us. We did notice. We did mark your attendance. You are special to us. And it just means a lot to people. We've met people through this pandemic experience who we know physically cannot come to the church. And again, that is never a barrier. We want people to know, and we experienced it through Zoom and all the technology that we continue to have, so that if you're limited on your ability to come to the church, we are still here for you. If you're maybe older and you don't do Zoom, or you don't exactly understand how to do that, that's okay too, because we can send you the newspaper, the church newspaper, in the mail. We can pick up the telephone and call you, and they certainly understand that and appreciate it. People even learned that they could prepare their own little communion at their home and participate with other people in that special sacred time. So there's many ways to reach people wherever they are, and I think that is the model that Jesus gave us. He always went to where the people were and met them in their own town, at their own place, and that's what we're trying to do in the same model that he taught us.
David, what are some challenges our church, or maybe even churches in general, face over the next few months or rest of this year as we come out of the pandemic? What are some opportunities or exciting pieces within those challenges?
For me, in terms of the future, I think a mistake that some churches will make is to think that digital church or live streaming or outreach through Zoom for small groups was just a technology to be used when we couldn't gather, and we're just going to gather back together. It's become clear to me that in terms of connecting with people who are seeking a relationship with Christ, which is what we're all about, is that some of those relationships are going to happen electronically or digitally. And as I was saying earlier, just as important, but it really broadens our reach. So I've had, online Bible studies now and book studies during COVID, where we had people on both coasts of the United States. We had one person tuning in from Germany, from multiple states around Oklahoma. And so the breadth of ministry we can do has been immensely multiplied through COVID, when we realized that you don't have to live in Tulsa, Oklahoma to be a part of Boston Avenue Church. You don't have to be able to come to the building physically to benefit from building relationships with other Christians at Boston Avenue Church. So I think that's one of the most exciting frontiers and future and a challenge for churches is, how do we continue to develop digital ministry? How do we continue to be in full relationship with people, even if they may never come to the building? That's just a whole new way of thinking for the church. We've been so bound to property and buildings and coming to one place, which is exciting and fun to do with people you enjoy being with. But there's a much bigger opportunity in terms of ministry if we don't limit ourselves to thinking about a piece of property or coming to one building or a certain place to practice our spiritual lives together. So it's a challenge, but it's also a fabulous opportunity that we're trying to lean into here at Boston Avenue and figure out how to move resources in that direction to reach those people. So that's part of it. The other part, that is harder, particularly for all of us who are used to thinking of our church community as those people who come to one place at one time regularly. And Caitlin referred to this, you don't have to, if you want to hear the sermon or hear the anthem or say the prayers, you do not have to be here at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, which was the, traditional time you had to be at a church if you're going to worship. You can record it on TV, We post them online. We do podcasts, rebroadcast of things. You can worship, you can learn any hour of any day of any week. And as we remember that as churches, and so we make that content available, then we have to realize that means we're also dispersing the message, but we're also kind of dispersing the crowd. And so that's going to look different, I think, as we go forward in terms of how we assess our effectiveness in terms of fulfilling the mission Christ gave us to reach people with God's love. It's not always going to be a certain number of people sitting in a certain room at a certain time of day. It's going to be much more dispersed, and it's going to, I think, move off of Sunday. Sunday will still be an important time, but it will obviously is not the only time people can worship or learn or pray together or study together or have fellowship and support from one another. So I think that's a challenge for a ministry, is how do we go forward with that? Likewise, if you're a smaller church and your people don't come back to the building, will you have the financial resources to even remain open? I think, we were already pre-COVID, we were already in a trend where more and more people were choosing not to come to a traditional church building for their spiritual nourishment. So if you're a small church and you're counting on a bare minimum number of people making financial gifts to take care of the building and pay the pastor and keep the building open, and half of those people decide not to return post-COVID, the future for those smaller churches is pretty dire. So I think we're going to have to deal with that going forward, is what happens to churches, particularly in rural communities or smaller churches in urban communities. I think many of them are probably ending up going to be closing, maybe never reopening after closing during COVID, or trying to reopen and not having the financial resources to sustain that. So that's going to be a real challenge going forward, I think, within the life of the church.
Belynda, to close us out, we have been through such a challenging season, and we are entering a season of just different challenges. And so in all of this, as a church community, how do we foster a culture of welcoming in the midst of digital space and in-person space? What are the top couple ideas that you have for being that culture of welcoming?
I would say practice, practice, practice. Every week when I'm recruiting our volunteers, the greeters for the week, I always remind them of the difference that they make and kind of build their spirit up and their sense of we need you and you're welcome here, so that they will share that smile and greet the new people who are coming to the church in a similar way. I think we just always have to be. I saw a man in the sanctuary on Sunday. He was not one of my greeters. He was not on my list, but he was going all around the sanctuary visiting with people before the service. And I talked to him afterwards and I said, you do such a wonderful job of that. Can I list you as an official greeter? And he said, you can't stop me from greeting. So I think it's helping everyone to understand that we need everybody. It's so wonderful when you see a person being greeted and then you want to introduce them to someone, but before you can get to them again, they're already being greeted by somebody else. So it's fostering that within the whole congregation to make everyone feel like they're part of that greeting process and needed to do that.
Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you would like to add to this podcast?
I think, Philip, I would like to say a closing word about what it means to welcome someone on their spiritual journey. So many churches historically have meant by that, if you come to our place, then you conform to what we believe and you practice worship just the way we have always done it. here at Boston Avenue, certainly we have traditions and rituals that we practice, but theologically and personally, our desire is to meet people where they are on their journey and then walk with them, answering their questions, helping them explore the things they're interested in terms of faith and theology and spiritual practices. We want to be a place where people know they're going to be accepted. We're going to celebrate where they are and try to support them in their journey of experiencing God's love in their own lives and practicing that love in terms of sharing with others that goodness and kindness that we know of, as we have had that experience in our own Christian life. So it's a little different approach in terms of what we mean by welcome, in terms of coming from wherever you are is okay. And we want to be inclusive. We know we're all in different places in our lives and in our spiritual journeys. And that's important to value that and find out where a person is and then try to resource them rather than, coming with an approach that we have all the answers. We know the right way to do everything. You just have to come be like us. We really try to offer a different kind of welcome or include people in a different way than that as they come to, explore their spiritual journey with us. Certainly, we're a traditional church, an historic church, but I think we have a different kind of welcome than a lot of people would expect just based on the look of our building or how long we have been here. I think we're working hard to meet people where they are and support them in their spiritual life and help them grow in the ways they're interested in growing. So I hope people will give us a try if they hear this, if they'll trust us enough to give us a shot on that. I think they'll experience support in their life from us.
Thank you both so much for joining us today. This has been the Ascends at Boston Avenue podcast. Our producer is Alicia Urban. Our theme music was composed and performed by Wyatt Smith. Boston Avenue United Methodist Church is a progressive, historic church located in downtown Tulsa, Oklahoma. Please visit our social media platforms for more information on what's going on at Boston Avenue UMC. We can be found on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. We'll talk to you next time. Thank you.